and that the chairperson's electronic signature be attached with that minor amendment. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you. Mayor Nigel, all in favour? Carried. So we'll move on to our first report for the day, which is just a moment, sorry. So we have a report on the in-house carbon management with Rhys Taylor and Andrew Dixon. Welcome, gentlemen. Have you got anything to introduce this, or are you?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think Andrew Dixon might be best placed to introduce the topic.
Okay, cool. So just the purpose of the report is to update the committee members with the proposed scope of the initial work and some suggested extensions. I'll hand over to you both. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. So with me is Rhys Taylor, who is leading our climate change work at Timaru. So this report here is about the measurement of in-house carbon usage. It's going to be a mandatory reporting requirement coming up in the next year, and so it's just some of the work that Rhys is doing to inform you of that work. So I'll pass it over to Rhys to just explain a bit more.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillors, the long-term plan committed the Council to doing several things related to climate issues. One we picked up on in our November meeting, and we'll come back to later in the year, probably April, with some really interesting progress on the work on strategy. That's not the topic for today, though. The in-house focus initially was to try to get our own house in order, to use the well-worn phrase. Until you actually know what the carbon emission consequences are of day-to-day business of the Council, it's very hard to know what you can work on to try to reduce any of those emissions, and in the process maybe even save some dollars as well. So the idea behind this, which is encouraged by the Mayoral Forum and is encouraged indeed by the Ministry of the Environment, is that we systematically record the carbon emissions generated by our work, starting with the things which are very obvious ones, such as the fuel use in our vehicle fleets and the electricity use in our buildings, and then moving to the more difficult and complex aspects as we work through the process. So what Andrew and I have suggested here is that we tackle this in two bites, and for the current financial year, which is a year of voluntary reporting, we gather the information that we can easily get hold of, and in the second year, which is when we move into mandatory reporting, we tackle the more difficult and complex aspects. And by difficult and complex, I mean, for example, talking with the council-controlled organisations, which we work alongside, because we need to bring them in with us. But I think it's very hard to persuade our colleagues in Venture Timaru or other such bodies to do this counting of carbon until we're doing it in-house here at the council offices and in our council activities and services. So the report is for your information. Very happy to take questions on it if required, but I know you've got a very full agenda and I didn't want to take a lot of your time.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. Any questions, Councillor Puddington?
Yeah, Bruce, I'm just interested, approximate fuel use by staff commuting to work. Are we going to tell staff where they can live and what they can do and how they can get to work? Certainly. I would have thought consultants flying in and driving would have been much more concern than how our staff get to work.
I do agree with you, Councillor. It's one of the areas which is included in the information that it's very useful to gather, but it's not a mandatory reporting item. Also, if you're trying to engage the whole team working for the Council in the issue of responding to climate change, one way of doing that is to make them aware of the carbon implications of how they travel. It's not to give them any advice necessarily on where they have to live or the means of their travel, but it may prompt practical actions. And two examples of those would be, on occasion, it may be efficient and effective for them to work from home and not travel. Another example would be to share their travel in, so they're coming in with another colleague. I'm already doing this myself. You're going to expect me to try and walk the talk if I can. So those practical actions might be prompted by an understanding of the carbon impact of their work. So we see this, the two of us, as an educational opportunity for us, an engagement opportunity within our staff team, rather than an attempt to direct where they're located. But thank you for asking.
Yeah, we also look at the modes of transport as well. You know, they can cycle, and we're doing a lot of work in the active transport area, but there's also the My Way bus service as well.
Thank you. Councillor Shannon, did you have a question?
It was actually the same question Councillor Puddington asked, only with regards to the fuel use by staff when as point 7 says, that reporting needs to be clear, consistent and credible. Obviously, accuracy would be a concern for me when reporting staff's actual fuel usage, whereas it's easy in-house for council vehicles. So how do you plan on actually gathering that data? Yeah, from staff.
From staff, it
Yes,
would be...
private
Mr. Taylor,
vehicles.
sorry, could I just add a little bit to that so you can ask both questions at the same time, because I had a very similar question about materiality and what is your level of materiality when you're collecting that data, because you think about taxis, are they diesel, are they electric, are they fuel? So if you wouldn't mind just including that in your answer, that would be great, thank you.
The reference you'll see in the paper under item 8 is approximate fuel use by staff. Our interest is to get an idea of order of magnitude, and it would be voluntary information provision to us, which gives us an idea of order of magnitude. You know, the average staff participant travels this distance, emits this amount of carbon per week. It's something along those lines that's going to be adequate for our purpose. In terms of official travel on council business, our travel agency, Orbit, already do carbon calculations and will be sharing that information with us. So that saves us having to double up. They're already recording the carbon impact of the flights, for example, where council staff or councillors have needed to travel. And so we have an indication of that. So if it already exists on someone's record system, we'll try to capture it. We're aiming to do this in a quick and efficient way, and to have technical advice that we do it in a way that other councils have already tried. So they're going to follow their experience rather than reinvent it.
Any other questions? Councillor Booth?
Oh, goodness. Can it be sheeted back to any monetary benefits in regards to your suggestions here, such as our liability for purchasing carbon credits?
There are two separate decisions here, Councillor Booth. The possibility of reducing operating costs may come from identifying if we have, for example, an over-provision of a vehicle fleet, or we have inefficient vehicles which could be less carbon emitting within the fleet. So that's an opportunity there for reducing operating costs. In terms of carbon credits, it's a separate decision for the council to consider whether we purchase large amounts of carbon credits at an often increasing price to offset our emissions. The focus I've been asked to have is on understanding our emissions and looking at ideas for reduction of emissions, which is good for the planet. The question of whether or not we attempt to offset and, for example, declare ourselves as being carbon neutral is a separate decision and not one we're ready for yet.
I guess it would be helpful if there was a monetary outcome for the council in regards to the work that you're doing, that we could reduce the purchase of the carbon, so therefore the stuff going into the landfill, etc., and obviously the benefit of the methane, which you've mentioned. So.
Yes, Madam Chair, I think it's very important that we look at the cost and the benefit of doing work on carbon reduction, and certainly we could indicate the cost we would incur if we had to buy carbon offset.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mayor Nigel. So the recommendation is that the Environmental Services Committee receives and notes the in-house carbon emission inventory progress report, and that a further update on progress be presented to the 25th of July 2023 Environmental Services Committee meeting. So that was moved by Mayor Nigel. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Booth. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, our next item on the agenda is a report on the RMA reform submission, and we have Bronwyn Larkins, Brendan Madley and Hamish Burrell to present this to us. Somebody else. Oh, that's right. And Mark Lowe, thank you. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval and input from the committee for the council submission to the Natural and Built Environment Bill and Spatial Planning Bill due on the 5th of February 2023.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to introduce it a little more, this is a submission that's been sought by central government, and it was put out for consultation prior to Christmas, the turnaround being the 5th of February. So it's put us under a little bit of pressure in terms of pulling this together. You will notice that there's a slight conflict in what's recommended in the report and what's currently in the draft submission, and that being around whether or not we would like to be a trial region at Canterbury for having adopting or moving towards the regional planning framework sooner rather than later. I'll hand over to the team and they can guide us through that and fill in the detail, but thanks very much. When you're ready, Mark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. So we'll just give a quick overview of the submission as it stands, and just reiterating that it is obviously a draft submission. There's a bit of refinement still to do on it following this meeting. The submission's closed for both bills at the end of this week. And I guess the submission itself is, a fairly high level. Obviously, we haven't delved into all the technical detail, but there will be other submissions such as the LGNZ, Taitoara and Canterbury Mayoral Forum submissions that will delve into some of that information and that will support. So I'll pass over to Bronwyn just to cover some of the key points that have been made in the submission, and then we can welcome your feedback and any questions you might have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, councillors. As you're aware, the Resource Management Act has become quite a difficult piece of legislation for users to navigate. Therefore, we recommend and we are grateful that there are new bills for this framework. The purpose of the Natural Built Environment Bill will be the bill that we'll be submitting on. It contains the majority of the framework, and therefore that is where we've have our focus. The NBE creates a positive aspect to outcomes, promoting the use, development and protection of the environment that focuses on the future wellbeing benefits to the environment, managing adverse effects and recognising and upholding Te Oranga o Te Atea, which is the health of the natural environment and the intrinsic relationship between iwi and hapu, and the interconnectedness of all parts of the natural environment and the essential relationship between the health of the natural environment and its capacity to sustain life. The NBE plans will categorise activities more consistently and play a key role in identifying who may participate in consenting. The bill will support communities to better prepare for the adaptation of climate change and the risk from natural hazards. The bill also provides new tools for compliance and enforcement. The NBE will create a regional planning committee who will determine themselves their size and the population based on weighting. The NBE recognises that states that the local iwi and hapu will also be part of this committee, providing decision-making progress. We do hold a number of concerns that have been raised in the draft submission, and I'll provide you just key lines for 7 of them. That is the tension in the Natural Built Environments Bill between its purpose, system outcomes and decision-making process. The fact that the Canterbury region is complex and diverse, more so than any other region. We held concerns for the size and the makeup of the Regional Planning Committee, the loss of local government viability, particularly at this time when there are a number of major government reforms occurring within other activities. The loss of local control and planning decisions within local jurisdictions, concerns about the reforms and the disproportionate burden that is placed on local government versus that of central government. Current local government changes, in particular the 3 water suites of bills. The draft submission contains suggestions for further options for central government to consider, as well as the major consideration for clarity of definitions to limit ambiguity. These reforms require a long-term investment of time and resources, and Timaru District Council should request cross-party support and commitment for these reforms. Welcome to any questions that you may have, councillors.
I might, if it's okay, Madam Chair, I might just get Hamish, do you have any comments that you want to make just on the bill as the expert?
Thank you, Mark. Look, I think the summary that's been provided by Bronwyn is more than satisfactory. The only bits that I would add is just to reiterate the fundamental change to a combined plan for the region and the process that will have to take place from here. It is possible, depending upon transitional arrangements, that we might be blessed with having not just 2 but 3 plans in operation at the same time, depending upon how this all works out. And the only other thing that I would add is that this week MFE are going to provide a letter to councils on this year's upcoming sort of milestones along the way in the process, not just for this legislation, but for also some of the important national direction which is still to come out. So watch this space in the next couple of days. Should be interesting.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you've done on this. I think you've done a really good job of taking what is a complex issue and refining it to a few key points for councillors to consider, so I appreciate the work that has been done there. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Burt?
Yeah, I'm happy to move the resolution in terms of accepting that report, and I just want to again reiterate for everyone that there is no accident in the fact that local government reform, Three Waters and RMA are aligned, and we can never look at them in isolation from one another. There's a tenet through them that is very, very specific in it. And you've highlighted in number 10 there in terms of the intention to rationalise that plan to make it potentially erode local democracy and the ability for council to take decisions that are in the best interest of Timaru District. And that's what we've all got to face, and we need to make sure that we're always alive to the fact that there is a very specific agenda in relation to that. So happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Before I seek a seconder, are there any further questions? Mayor Nigel?
I do.
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, look, happy to second it if it wasn't done, but also just want to emphasise that you make the point that we aren't involved in the trial, so that's not a part of it, because I would hate for us to go down that track. I think we're going to get better value out of the investment that we put into our plan by not being involved. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Scott?
Just a couple of questions. Do we get to speak to the submission? Or is it just a written submission? Is there the opportunity to speak?
It's a select committee process, so there is the opportunity to speak. I'm not sure on this one whether they will be restricting the number of groups that do speak, but we can certainly, if that's the wish of the committee, we can add that to it.
Yeah, okay. And I just, RPC is obviously Regional Planning Committee, but I couldn't find the abbreviation for RCP.
I do apologise, councillor, that was a typo error on my behalf, and I hold that.
Oh no, that's all right. I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I
No,
can't
that's
do
all right.
Control F, so I couldn't find that.
I do apologise,
No,
councillor.
that's fine. No, that's all good. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a few little bit of refinement that we'll do for this meeting just to tidy it up.
Are there any other questions before I have a few myself? But are there any other questions? Want to take questions from the floor? Or not? Okay, thank you. Yeah, Jan, do you have a question?
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, hang on. Sorry, Jan, you may have to come up and ask your question at the microphone so it can be heard.
Thanks for that. Yeah, well, it's more an observation. I do have a lot of experience working with the conservation legislation, which has a similar Section 4, which is, you know, it's equivalent to what you've got here as Clause 4. It's actually turned up a lot of confusion and a lot of wastage of resources and time because it's not clear, and there are a lot of very subjective concepts that are given life to through it, particularly in this bit of proposed ledge. And I would say, just to encapsulate that or give an example, there hasn't been a conservation planning tool approved for, I think, 4 years, and in large part because of the confusion caused by the equivalent Section 4. So it's just something to really think about, and I think it maybe a lot of groups are nervous of addressing it, but it needs to be addressed. Yeah, I know actually at the Environmental Defence Society's conference a couple of years ago, Tony Randerson was present, and he emphasised that this needs a lot more thinking about and specificity. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jan. That probably leads on to one of my points, and I've just got to remember which one it is, sorry. Point 26, and my view is, because now we've ended up with two competing tensions, as you point out, between environment and development, whereas we used to have to take into account the well-being, the socio-economic and well-being of the community, and I think we need to advocate hard to keep that in there. Because it is, in my view, I'm not sure what the rest of council think, but in my view that's a really important consideration in any decision. I also, at point 44, it talks about urban development, whereas it's silent on rural development, and I actually think we should just talk about development, would be my view, because this has the potential to stymie rural development as well, not just urban development. Point 35, I wasn't convinced that that was a valid argument. That talks about what happens when somebody leaves the committee and you get a new member on, but that's going to happen at any time when you have a change to the committee, so I just wasn't convinced it was a valid argument, but so I would suggest that it's taken out unless somebody has an allergic reaction to that. And then I just wondered if you could just discuss point 19 for me, please, because I got a bit confused. So that's about where you're asking to consider different populations. So did you mean different ethnic groups, special groups, community groups, or did you mean size of population? Because I think we'd end up with two very different outcomes. If you wouldn't mind just explaining that, if you may, sorry.
Meant size of the population. So Timaru district in itself has the population's more widespread than that of, say, Christchurch. So it's about the urban population sprawl.
Okay, because I thought from what I read, and forgive me if I've misunderstood this, but we were trying to advocate, because I thought we'd end up with not a very good representation because we have a small population size, and I felt like that was kind of an oxymoron, because then we're saying do it on population size and that won't benefit us, but have I misunderstood that?
I think, Madam Chair, we took on the point that was received through Mr Cooper from you about the population weighting is normal way of voting. We've got very small councils here within the Canterbury region, and we didn't, if potentially all 11 of them could sit on the Regional Planning Committee, which would make the committee quite large. We wanted to ensure that some larger councils, say for example Christchurch, didn't say, oh, well, Waimate can't have one because they've only got a small number of constituents that they look after. So I need to redraft that clearer for you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Then I just kind of had a general comment, and for example, point 3, and I actually probably just ask council if this is their opinion. So just having read submissions from various groups on different things, I have a little bit of a thing for when something that is an opinion is presented as if it's a fact, and to me point 3 is an opinion, but it comes across as if it's a fact, and I just actually want to make sure that that is council's opinion, because this will be endorsed by council, that it has become frustratingly clunky. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but and there's a couple of other places in there where there's something that is actually an opinion, but it doesn't have the we think council believes, that actually points out that it's just an opinion rather than a fact.
With clause 3, there, Madam Chair, that has already been redrafted and reworded.
Okay, thank you.
So I do thank you, though.
Okay. Thank
You're on the, I have the same opinion of Mr.
good.
Cooper.
And then just one very last thing is under point 2, it says it's been endorsed by the chair of the committee, and I think it would have more weighting if council are comfortable that we put in there that it's supported by council, and even if it is unanimously supported, that we include the word unanimously, so that it just carries a wee bit more weight than just me endorsing it, that it's fully supported by council.
Happy to make that change.
Does anyone have any objections to any of that? Okay, so if not, are there any further questions? Okay, so if not, we have Councillor Burt has already moved the recommendation that the Environmental Services Committee receive and consider the draft Natural and Built Environment Bill and Spatial Planning Bill submission and endorse the draft submission as attached. That was seconded by Mayor Nigel. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much. I think that, thank you very much everyone, that was really good. There are no matters of urgent or minor business, so